might be said to be a little bit, partial. I do love stories. I spent my life not just teaching them, but looking at some of the unique ways it relates to culture as well. So I love to hear stories from different cultures, and I'm not going to overplay it, but as you know, every culture has stories to tell, right? More specifically than it's said to be at the core of culture and something that we share, we exchange. It's how histories are passed down. A lot of us have stories within our culture that when someone passes away, it kind of moves on to the next person, so to speak. And I'd like to know, and any one of you can answer this, how would you define, or how do you define story in regard to your culture? Can you share one that you closely identify with? And can you tell us a little bit about how it has impacted your life?
I would love to go first for that. I'm just going to dive in, guys. Oh my goodness, Professor Locke, stories. That is my passion. I believe that my life is a story. And I've actually, within the last maybe 15 years, I've grown to absolutely fall in love with my own story. I feel as though my story has its own legs, and all I do is follow it wherever my story leads me. I'm very visual, so I see that. And then, by the way, in psychology, in the clinical world, there is a theory called narrative therapy. And I gravitate to it so deeply because after reading the books about narrative therapy and learning it, what I learned was that our stories are encased in a frame. And the legs of a frame is how you perceive your story. So if you've had a very bad story in your life, those 4 legs, as I call, they may be shame, guilt, unforgiveness, anger, or rage. And narrative therapy, what it does is assist the client to change their 4 legs of the story and begin to learn to see their story from a different, more positive, purpose-driven perspective. And I love that because that is my story. So I won't go into any details, I promise, but I come from very early childhood abuse. And so coming from abuse, you see your life from only one lens: suffering and trauma, really. And but I've always believed that God, in my conception, God deposited in me my 2 pearls, which are resilience and tenacity. And so growing up, those were the 2 drives, those were the 2 forces that just got me through everything. And so now, as a grown adult, way older than any of you, I have come to a place where I'm able to love my story because that ugly, despondent, depressing, and desolate story that I was born into has become a story of life, life-giving power and positivity for others. And so that's why I love stories so much, because I was able to change the frame of my story. And my 4 words are purpose, forgiveness. I can't remember the other 2 right now, but trust me, they're really good. And, just joy, no more shame, but joy. And I love God for that. I love my God for all that he's done for me.
Amen, amen. I'm not going to get excited.
You're such an inspiration, Dr. Toni. You really are. And so my story, it's also comes from my dad. So like I shared, I did come from more of a financial privilege and white skin color privilege. And so being able to own my privilege and check it, as they say, check my privilege when I need to, comes from my father's story of oppression. And so his story was, you know, when he moved here as a kid from Puerto Rico, they automatically saw him as a dark-skinned Spanish-speaking kid, and they put him in remedial classes. And so it wasn't until he won a science fair project that his teachers said, oh, well, maybe he's smart. Let's put him in mainstream classes. And so that was a turning point for him and for me, because if he kept in remedial classes, his future would have been very different. And thus my future would have been very different. He would probably not have gone to college and become an accountant and be able to provide the financial stability that I had as a kid. And so hearing that story really fuels my social justice passion, which is what helps me to use my privilege in ways to empower groups that are marginalized. And so for me, storytelling in my family was the way that they communicated different struggles, different values, and even they used storytelling to also encourage behaviors that they wanted out of me. Right? So there are kind of these indirect ways of saying, don't do A, B, and C like your uncle did, you know, what happened to him, instead of, you know, directly telling me don't do it kind of thing. So that's where stories play a role in my life.
Thank you.
I could be brief. You know, I think about my mother, who was living in Harlem, divorced from my father, didn't speak the language, had to raise 3 kids. And the fight, the resiliency, the tenacity, these are words that I feel like Latinos have very deep in them. She was able to raise us against all odds. My father being incarcerated at a certain point because he started living a life of crime. And yeah, all 3 of us, her children, and now have master's degrees. Now are educators and supervisors and directors, you know. But I feel like whenever, you know, and we'll get to academia and how, what I, you know, where academia lies in my life, but that level of fight is what's gotten me through life. I'm a fighter. I grew up in Harlem, for me as a kid, was not a fairy tale. It was gang ridden, whether it was the Bloods versus the Latin Kings or the Crips. There was drugs everywhere. And I had to fight to make it through all of the challenges, all of the odds. Not speaking English as my first language, having a father that was imprisoned, growing up in the worst school district in New York City. But the fight that my mother taught me, her story, how she stood up to my dad and was the only woman that was ever able to stand up to him, how she was able to find help, how she was able to pass through the language barrier. That fight is something that I love my mother for to this day. I have that inside of me. And every now and again, you know, I look at her and I'm like, Mom, you know, all of the bad qualities that you have, I've gotten them double. But you know what's one thing I love, Mom? Those things that are great in you, Mom, you gave those things to me. Those are the things that made me who I am. Those are the things that allowed me to achieve. And so, you know, what can I say? I'm my mother's child. Doubly those things that are bad, I have them. But that one thing that was able to cause her to overcome all of those challenges, she gave that to me too. And that's why I'm here. All right, yeah.
Thank you, Jensy. Yeah. As I said, I've always been inspired by story, and I think that that's important to kind of lay the foundation for where we're going to go tonight.